Maria Santos wiped the grease from her hands as she finished checking the engine of the transport plane. The other mechanics at the airfield barely glanced in her direction. To them, she was just another maintenance worker, someone who fixed planes rather than flew them. The year was 1943, and women weren't supposed to be combat pilots, especially not in the remote Pacific theater where their base operated. She had learned to fly in secret years before the war began. Her father owned a small airstrip back in California, and while her brothers learned the family business openly, Maria had to sneak lessons during early morning hours when no one was watching. Her instructor, an old barnstormer named Jake, recognized her natural talent immediately. She could feel the wind patterns, understand the aircraft's language, and make split-second decisions that kept her alive in the air. When the war started, Maria tried to join the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, but they rejected her application. Her background wasn't clean enough, they said. Too many questions about her family's connections. Frustrated but determined, she found another way to serve. She forged documents, changed her identity slightly, and got a job as a mechanic at a forward operating base in the Solomon Islands. The base commander, Colonel Harrison, ran a tight operation. He had 37 aircraft under his command, mostly fighters and a few bombers. The pilots were young men, barely out of training, facing experienced Japanese aviators who had been fighting since the beginning of the war. Every day, planes went out on missions. Not all of them came back. Maria watched the pilots prepare for their sorties, studying their techniques, memorizing their procedures. She knew she could fly any of those planes better than half the men, climbing into the cockpits. During quiet moments, she would sit in the abandoned aircraft running through mental checklists, imagining combat scenarios. Her hands moved over controls she had never officially been trained to use, but somehow understood perfectly. The other mechanics respected her work. She could diagnose engine problems faster than anyone else on the base. When carburetor issues grounded 3 fighters, she figured out the fix that had stumped the senior technicians. Her reputation grew, but always as a mechanic, never as someone who might actually take to the skies. Lieutenant Bobby Chen was one of the few people who suspected Maria might be more than she appeared. He often found her in the hangars late at night, not working on engines but sitting quietly in pilot seats. Once he caught her going through the pre-flight checklist with perfect precision. When he asked about it, she claimed she was just curious about pilot procedures to better understand maintenance requirements. The Japanese had been increasing their attacks on Allied positions throughout the region. Intelligence reports suggested a major offensive was coming, but nobody knew exactly when or where. The base had been placed on high alert with pilots sleeping near their aircraft and mechanics working around the clock to keep every plane operational. Maria felt the tension, building like pressure before a storm. She had overheard radio communications about enemy reconnaissance flights spotted in the area. The Japanese were planning something big, and their small base would likely be a target. She checked and double-checked every aircraft under her care, knowing that when the attack came, every plane would need to be perfect. 3 days before the attack, she made a decision that would change everything. Late at night, while the base slept, she took one of the spare fighters up for a test flight. Officially, she was checking engine performance after a major repair. Unofficially, she was preparing for a moment she sensed was coming soon. The aircraft responded to her touch like it had been waiting for her all along. She flew low over the dark ocean, practicing combat maneuvers she had only studied in stolen moments. The plane felt alive beneath her hands, and for the first time since arriving at the base, she felt like herself again. She was not just a mechanic, hiding in the shadows. She was a pilot, and soon the world would know it. Dawn broke gray and humid over the Solomon Islands on what would become the most important day of Maria's life. She had been awake since 3 in the morning, unable to sleep through the strange quiet that had settled over the base. Even the usual sounds of distant artillery had stopped, creating an unnatural stillness that made experienced soldiers nervous. The radio crackled to life at 0547 hours with urgent coded messages. Maria was in Hangar 3, performing what she hoped would be final checks on the fighters, when she heard the communications officer's voice rise in pitch. Enemy aircraft had been spotted on radar, approaching from the northeast in formation. This wasn't another reconnaissance mission or small harassment raid. Intelligence estimated at least 40 Japanese planes heading their way. Colonel Harrison's voice echoed across the base through the loudspeaker system, calling all pilots to immediate readiness. Maria watched through the hangar doors as men ran toward their aircraft, some still pulling on flight suits, others gulping down quick cups of coffee. The organized chaos of a scramble alert filled the air with shouting voices and roaring engines. She counted the pilots as they reached their planes, 23 men for 28 operational aircraft. 3 pilots were in the infirmary with dengue fever, 2 more were on leave, and another had been transferred out the previous day. They were short-handed at the worst possible time, with 5 perfectly good fighters sitting empty while enemy bombers approached their position. Lieutenant Chen appeared beside her, his face pale but determined. He had been assigned to one of the fighters she had personally serviced the night before. "Maria," he said quietly, "if something happens to me up there, I want you to know that you're the best damn mechanic I've ever worked with. These planes fly because of people like you." She watched him climb into his cockpit, and something twisted in her chest. These young men were about to face experienced Japanese pilots who had been fighting for years. Many of them had fewer than 50 hours of combat experience. She knew with absolute certainty that some of them would not return. The first wave of fighters began taking off, their engines screaming as they climbed toward the approaching enemy formation. Maria moved to the radio room where she could monitor the communications. The voices of the pilots came through in staccato bursts, professional but tight with concentration. "Blue Leader, this is Blue 3. I count 12 bogeys at 2 o'clock. Hi. Roger, Blue 3, stay in formation, wait for my mark." The Japanese had sent a mixed force, 18 fighters escorting 22 bombers, likely targeting the airfield and fuel storage areas. The mathematics were grim. Even if every American pilot performed perfectly, the enemy had superior numbers and position. The Japanese pilots were diving from altitude, using the sun to mask their approach. Maria heard the first explosions as enemy bombers began their attack run. The base's anti-aircraft guns opened up, filling the sky with black puffs of smoke, but the Japanese formation maintained discipline. Several buildings near the fuel depot erupted in flames, and she could feel the heat even from her position near the hangars. Through the chaos, she heard Colonel Harrison's voice on the radio, coordinating the defense from his command post. His usual calm had given way to barely controlled urgency as reports came in of multiple aircraft damaged or destroyed on the ground. The attack was succeeding, and the American fighters were outnumbered and outpositioned. All units, Harrison transmitted. "We need every available aircraft in the air. I repeat, every available aircraft." Maria looked at the 5 empty fighters sitting in the hangar. She knew their systems better than anyone on the base. She had personally tested their engines, calibrated their weapons, and verified their communications equipment. These aircraft were not just machines to her, they were extensions of her own will, waiting for someone skilled enough to use them. The decision crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. She walked quickly to the nearest fighter, a P-40 Warhawk she had nicknamed Lightning during the long hours spent perfecting its engine. The cockpit felt familiar as she settled into the pilot's seat. Her hands moved automatically through the startup sequence, muscle memory taking over where official training had never existed. The engine caught on the first try, settling into the smooth rumble that told her everything was perfect. She had perhaps 30 seconds before someone noticed what she was doing. In 30 seconds, she would either be arrested for stealing military aircraft, or she would be in the air, finally able to fight the war she had been preparing for all her life. She pushed the throttle forward and felt the aircraft respond. There was no going back now. Maria Santos, the secret pilot, was about to reveal herself to the world. The P-40 Warhawk rolled out of the hangar with Maria at the controls, her heart pounding but her hands steady on the stick. Ground crew members scattered in confusion as the supposedly unmanned aircraft moved toward the runway. She could see Colonel Harrison running from the command post, shouting something she couldn't hear over the engine noise. There was no time for explanations or permissions. Radio chatter filled her headset with desperate voices as American fighters engaged, the enemy formation high above. She could see the black smoke trails where aircraft had been hit, some spiraling downward in flames. The sky was full of danger, but staying on the ground meant watching her fellow servicemen die while she did nothing. She pushed the throttle to full power and felt the Warhawk surge forward. The runway rushed beneath her as she gained speed, and then she was airborne, climbing steeply into the morning chaos. Below, the base was burning in 3 locations, with fires spreading toward the ammunition storage area. The Japanese attack was succeeding exactly as planned. Unknown aircraft, unknown aircraft. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through her headset. Identify yourself immediately. You are not cleared for takeoff. Maria switched to the tactical frequency where the pilots were coordinating their desperate defense. She would explain herself to Harrison later, if they both survived the next 20 minutes. Right now, the American fighters needed help, and she was the only reinforcement available. Blue Leader, this is Lightning, she transmitted using the call sign painted on her aircraft's nose. Single P-40 joining the fight. What's your position? Lightning? Who the hell is Lightning? Blue Leader responded. We don't have any Lightning on the roster. Doesn't matter right now, Maria replied, scanning the sky for the enemy formation. I can see 6 Zeros breaking off from the main group heading for the burning buildings. They're making another attack run. She was right. The Japanese pilots were following their standard pattern, with fighters peeling off to strafe ground targets while the bombers prepared for a second pass. The American defenders were focused on the high-altitude threat, leaving the low-level attackers unopposed. Maria dove toward the 6 Zeros, her P-40 building speed as she descended. She had studied every aspect of air combat during her stolen hours in the library, reading after-action reports and tactical analyses. She knew the P-40's strengths and weaknesses, and more importantly, she understood the Japanese pilots' likely tactics. The lead Zero never saw her coming. Maria opened fire at 300 yards, her machine gun stitching a line of tracers across the enemy fighter's wing route. The Japanese aircraft shuddered, rolled inverted, and dove toward the ocean trailing black smoke. Her first kill in combat came so quickly that she barely had time to register what had happened. The other 5 Zeros reacted instantly, breaking formation and turning to engage this unexpected threat. Maria pulled hard right, using the P-40's superior dive speed to extend away from the enemy fighters. She had caught them by surprise, but now they knew she was there, and Zero pilots were not easily fooled twice. Lightning, where did you come from? Lieutenant Chen's voice cut through the radio chatter. I thought all our birds were accounted for. Long story, Maria replied, pulling into a climbing turn as 2 Zeros tried to bracket her position. Right now we have bigger problems. Those bombers are setting up for another run, and there are still too many escorts. She was flying the fight of her life, using every bit of knowledge she had gained through years of secret study and practice. The P-40 responded to her commands like a living thing, turning and diving and climbing in perfect harmony with her intentions. This was what she had been born to do, what all those midnight hours of preparation had led toward. The Japanese pilots were skilled and experienced, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that all the competent American pilots were already engaged with the main formation. The appearance of a lone P-40 attacking from an unexpected angle had disrupted their carefully coordinated assault. Maria lined up on another Zero that was diving toward the fuel storage area. This pilot was more alert than the first, throwing his aircraft into a violent, evasive maneuver as soon as he spotted her approach. The dogfight that followed lasted less than 2 minutes but felt like hours, with both aircraft twisting and turning in deadly aerial ballet. When it ended, the Zero was falling toward the jungle in pieces, and Maria's P-40 had taken several hits to the fuselage. Her engine was running rough, and she could smell hydraulic fluid leaking somewhere behind her seat, but she was still flying, still fighting, and the Japanese attack formation was beginning to show signs of disorganization. Blue Leader to all units. The radio crackled. Whatever Lightning is doing down there, it's working. The escort fighters are breaking off to deal with him. Now's our chance to hit those bombers. Maria smiled grimly as she turned toward 3 more Zeros that were climbing to intercept her. They still didn't know her real identity, but they were about to learn that whoever was flying Lightning knew exactly what they were doing. The battle was far from over, But for the first time since the attack began, the Americans had seized the initiative. The three Zeros climbing toward Maria moved with the coordinated precision of veteran pilots. She could see them adjusting their formation to trap her in a crossfire, a tactic that had claimed many Allied fighters. But Maria had studied these maneuvers and captured Japanese training manuals, and she knew the countermoves that most American pilots had never learned. Instead of running or climbing to escape, she did something unexpected. She rolled inverted and dove directly toward the lead Zero, her machine guns blazing. The Japanese pilot, surprised by her aggressive response, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. In air combat, hesitation was death. Her bullets found their mark, punching through the Zero's thin aluminum skin and into the engine. The enemy fighter erupted in flames and spun wildly out of control. The other two Zeros, caught off guard by their leader's sudden destruction, broke formation and scattered. "Lightning, you magnificent bastard!" Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled through the radio. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Maria didn't have time to answer. Her instruments showed engine temperature climbing into the red zone, and the rough vibration was getting worse. She had perhaps 5 more minutes of flight time before mechanical failure forced her down. Every second had to count. High above, the American fighters had finally reached the Japanese bomber formation. She could see the aerial battle unfolding as tiny specks of light danced against the morning sky, leaving contrails and smoke trails in their wake. Several bombers were already falling, but there were still too many, and they were preparing for a final devastating attack on the base's remaining fuel supplies. Maria spotted her next target, a lone Zero that had become separated from the main fight and was diving toward the control tower. The Japanese pilot was focused on his strafing run and hadn't noticed the damaged P-40 approaching from his blind spot. She lined up carefully, leading the target just as her secret instructor had taught her years ago. Her remaining ammunition tore into the Zero's cockpit area. The enemy aircraft rolled lazily to the right and disappeared behind a hill, trailing smoke. Her fourth kill in less than 15 minutes, but her ammunition counter showed she was nearly empty. Each remaining bullet would have to be perfect. The radio chatter had become increasingly frantic as both sides threw everything into the battle. American voices mixed with what she assumed were Japanese transmissions, creating a chaos of sound that made coordination almost impossible. Through it all, she heard Colonel Harrison trying to maintain some kind of order from the command post. All units, Harrison transmitted. Enemy bombers are regrouping for final attack on fuel storage Bravo. All available fighters. Intercept immediately." Maria looked up and saw the remaining Japanese bombers forming into a tight formation, their fighter escorts rallying around them for protection. There were still at least 15 bombers and maybe 8 Zeros, more than enough to complete the destruction of the base. The American fighters were scattered and low on ammunition, unable to mount an effective coordinated attack. That's when she saw her opportunity. The Japanese formation was flying a predictable pattern, setting up their bombing run from the northeast. If she could get above them and attack from the sun, she might be able to disrupt their formation long enough for the other American pilots to engage effectively. Her engine coughed and missed a beat, reminding her that time was running out. Puerto. Smoke was beginning to trail from her exhaust, and the controls felt increasingly sluggish. The P-40 was dying around her, but it still had one more fight left in it. She began a climbing turn, coaxing every bit of altitude she could from the damaged aircraft. The Japanese formation grew larger in her windscreen as she approached from their blind spot. The bombers flew in perfect discipline, their crews focused on the target below, trusting their fighter escorts to protect them from attack. Maria counted her remaining ammunition, perhaps 50 rounds spread across all her guns. Not enough for a prolonged engagement, but sufficient for one perfect attack if she could get close enough. She would have to make this count, because there wouldn't be a second chance. The lead bomber filled her gun sight as she dove from 12,000 feet, the P-40 building speed, despite its mechanical problems. The Japanese crew never saw her coming, until her bullets began tearing through their aircraft's skin. The bomber shuddered, rolled to the left and began to fall, its bomb bay doors opening prematurely and spilling its deadly cargo harmlessly into the ocean. But Maria's attack had done more than claim a single bomber. The sudden appearance of an American fighter in the middle of their formation shattered the Japanese bombers' careful coordination. Pilots broke formation instinctively, some turning left, others right, all of them disrupting the precise timing needed for an effective bombing attack. In that moment of chaos, the scattered American fighters found their opportunity. They dove on the confused enemy formation from multiple angles, their combined firepower finally overwhelming the Japanese defenses. Maria watched with grim satisfaction as bomber after bomber fell from the sky, their mission incomplete, their formation destroyed by a single unexpected attack from an unknown pilot. Maria's P-40 was dying. Engine oil streaked across her windscreen, the controls responded sluggishly to her commands, and strange vibrations shook the entire airframe. She had perhaps 2 minutes of flight time remaining, maybe less. But the battle wasn't over, and 2 Japanese fighters were still prowling the area, looking for damaged American aircraft to finish off. She spotted them first. 2 Zeros flying in formation about a mile to her southeast, gradually turning toward where Lieutenant Chen's fighter was limping home with smoke trailing from its engine. Chen's radio had gone silent 3 minutes ago, probably due to battle damage, which meant he couldn't see the enemy fighters approaching his 6 o'clock position. Maria's ammunition counter showed 12 rounds remaining. 12 bullets to save a friend's life and end her own unlikely combat debut. She pushed her failing engine to full power one last time, feeling the aircraft shudder as mechanical systems began their final breakdown. The lead Zero pilot was so focused on Chen's damaged fighter that he never noticed the battered P-40 approaching from above. Maria's attack was clinical and precise, her last burst of machine gun fire stitching across the enemy aircraft's fuel tanks. The Zero exploded in a brilliant orange fireball, the shockwave rocking both remaining aircraft. The second Zero pilot reacted immediately, abandoning his attack on Chen and turning aggressively toward Maria. This pilot was different from the others she had faced, more experienced, more cautious. He kept his distance, studying her damaged aircraft, waiting for the right moment to strike. Maria knew she was in trouble. Her engine was running on borrowed time, her controls were barely responsive, and she had no ammunition left. The Japanese pilot had every advantage except one. He didn't know he was fighting someone who had nothing left to lose. She turned toward the Zero in a head-on approach, a maneuver that experienced pilots called chicken. 2 aircraft flying directly at each other, each waiting for the other to break off first. In her damaged condition, it was suicide, but it was also the only tactic that might work. The Zero pilot held his course, confident that the American would break off at the last second. His machine guns began firing at long range, tracers reaching out toward Maria's aircraft. She felt bullets striking her wings and fuselage, but she maintained her heading, flying straight toward the enemy fighter. At the last possible second, the Japanese pilot's nerve broke. He pulled hard right, trying to avoid collision. But his evasive maneuver took him directly into Maria's flight path, and her left wing struck his aircraft just behind the cockpit. Both planes cartwheeled through the sky, locked together in a deadly embrace. Maria fought to maintain control as her P-40 broke free from the collision, but it was hopeless. The left wing was gone, taking most of her control surfaces with it. The aircraft entered an unrecoverable spin, falling toward the jungle below. Through her fractured windscreen, she could see the Zero spinning in the opposite direction, also doomed. She had perhaps 30 seconds before impact. In those final moments, Maria thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this point. A girl who loved flying had become a woman who hid her talents, then finally, in the last minutes of her life, revealed herself as one of the finest combat pilots of the war. The radio crackled with voices calling for lightning, asking for her position, wanting to know if she needed assistance. She smiled at the irony. For years, no one had acknowledged her abilities. Now, as she was about to die, everyone wanted to help. Lightning to all units, she transmitted, her voice calm despite the aircraft's violent motion. This is Maria Santos, mechanic first class, formerly of Bakersfield, California. Tell my story. Tell them that women can fly, women can fight, and women can die for their country just like any man. The jungle rushed up to meet her, green and peaceful in the morning light. Her last coherent thought was satisfaction that she had saved Lieutenant Chen's life and helped break up the Japanese attack. The base would survive. The fuel supplies were safe, and 6 enemy aircraft would never threaten Allied forces again. The P-40 Warhawk, nicknamed Lightning, disappeared into the dense canopy with a sound like thunder, taking with it the secret identity of the most effective combat pilot most people would never know had existed. But the legend of Lightning's 20-minute battle was just beginning. And soon, everyone would know that Maria Santos had been much more than just a mechanic who fixed airplanes. Colonel Harrison stood in the smoking ruins of Hangar 3, holding a clipboard with maintenance records that would change military history. The Japanese attack had been repelled, but the victory came at a tremendous cost. 7 American aircraft were destroyed, 5 pilots were missing, and the mysterious pilot known only as Lightning had sacrificed everything to break up the enemy bomber formation. Lieutenant Chen had landed safely, his aircraft damaged but repairable. The smoke trail Maria had spotted was from a severed hydraulic line, not engine failure. He owed his life to Lightning's final attack on the 2 Zeros, and he was desperate to know the identity of the pilot who had saved him. "Sir," Chen said, to Colonel Harrison, "that pilot saved my life and probably saved the base. We need to find out who Lightning was and recommend him for the Medal of Honor." Harrison looked up from the maintenance logs with an expression Chen had never seen before. The colonel's face showed confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been respect. "Lieutenant," Harrison said slowly, "Lightning wasn't a him. According to these records, the aircraft that took off without authorization was serviced yesterday by mechanic first class Maria Santos, the same Maria Santos who transmitted that final radio message." The truth spread through the base like wildfire. Maria Santos, the quiet mechanic who could fix any engine problem, had been secretly maintaining her own flying skills for months. The other mechanics confirmed that they had often found her in cockpits late at night, running through checklists and studying flight manuals. They had assumed she was just curious about pilot procedures to help with maintenance work. A search and rescue team found the wreckage of Lightning 3 days later, deep in the jungle where few people had ever ventured. The aircraft was completely destroyed, scattered across a small clearing where Maria had apparently tried to control her final descent. They found her body still strapped into the pilot's seat, surrounded by the scattered remains of the most effective 20 minutes of air combat most of them would ever witness. Investigation into Maria's background revealed the full extent of her secret life. Military intelligence discovered her original application to the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, rejected not because of family connections, but because she had attempted to falsify her age to make herself appear older and more experienced. She had been 18 when the war started, too young for combat duty by any standard. Her father's airstrip in California confirmed that Maria had been flying since she was 14 years old, logging hundreds of hours in various aircraft types. Her instructor, Jake Morrison, came forward with detailed records of her training, including advanced aerobatic and combat maneuvers that explained her extraordinary performance during the battle. The other pilots who had participated in the engagement provided testimony about Lightning's tactical brilliance. She had appeared at exactly the right moment, attacked from the perfect angle, and disrupted the enemy formation in a way that allowed the scattered American forces to regroup and counterattack effectively. Her sacrifice had saved not just Lieutenant Chen's life, but potentially the entire base. Colonel Harrison faced a difficult decision. Military regulations clearly prohibited women from combat roles, and Maria had violated numerous protocols by taking an aircraft without authorization. But the same regulations that condemned her actions also demanded recognition for extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy fire. He chose to focus on results rather than regulations. His official report described Lightning as an unknown pilot of extraordinary skill who appeared during the enemy attack and single-handedly disrupted the Japanese bomber formation, enabling American forces to repel a numerically superior enemy. The report made no mention of gender. focusing instead on tactical analysis and combat effectiveness. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor moved up through military channels, gathering support from every officer who reviewed the case. 6 confirmed enemy kills in 20 minutes, achieved by a pilot flying a damaged aircraft with minimal ammunition, represented the kind of heroic action the medal was designed to recognize. When the truth about Lightning's identity finally reached Washington, it created a bureaucratic crisis. How could the military award its highest honor to someone who had technically been absent without leave and operating outside her assigned duties? The compromise solution satisfied no one, but allowed everyone to save face. Maria Santos received the Distinguished Flying Cross posthumously, with a citation that carefully avoided mentioning her gender while acknowledging her extraordinary heroism and exceptional flying skill in action against enemy forces. The medal was presented to her father at his California airstrip, surrounded by other women who had learned to fly in secret, dreaming of their own chance to serve. The story of Lightning's 20-minute battle became legend among Pacific Theater pilots, passed down through squadrons and air groups as an example of perfect tactical thinking under impossible pressure. Most of the pilots who told the story never learned Lightning's real name or identity, but they all agreed on one thing. Whoever had been flying that P-40 was one of the finest combat pilots they had ever seen. Maria Santos had hidden her talents for years, died in minutes of glorious combat, and became immortal as the mysterious pilot no one knew was a woman until 6 enemy aircraft fell in 20 minutes. Her secret was revealed, but her legend had only just begun.